we go. Let there be light. So I hope you had a great experience in these 3 roundtables, and we are going to ask the reporters or rapporteurs, or however you want to call it, to come and tell us what happened in those roundtables in a second. So the first one, for those of you who weren't in that first one, it really was about how to mobilize private finance to get what we would like to see happen toward our net zero transition. Then the second roundtable was how to tackle emissions from hard to decarbonize sectors. And then the third one was on emerging energy security challenge for supply chains, especially, and critical materials and minerals that underpin some of the chokeholds that we are seeing across the world. And I think each of these was moderated by one of IEA's experts, right? Another reason why the IEA is at the head of the pack in terms of expertise. So I want to, I think, start, if we could, with Stephanie Pfeiffer. Stephanie was she's the CEO of the Institutional Investors Group on Climate Change. If I could invite you up to the podium, Stephanie. She is going to share the insights from the group, and I'm wondering whether we've actually figured it out in your group, Stephanie, about how, why strong performance on financial markets in these clean energy companies hasn't necessarily translated into capital expenditures and deployment.
Thank you very much, Secretary Granholm, and it's a pleasure to be here also with the IEA. As you say, I work with institutional investors, and I would like to start by thanking Dr. Birol as well for bringing out the net zero roadmap last year, which really helped investors pinpoint where investments are needed and are critical. So it's been hugely helpful. So thank you very much for that. We've also seen a huge rise in the number of commitments, as was previously mentioned, from the private sector, particularly from asset managers and pension funds. So very much committed to those Paris goals, which means helping to decarbonize the global economy, but also invest in those green solutions. And a lot of the decarbonization will, of course, happen through the engagement with companies. We had a very engaging session looking at how to accelerate private finance into clean energy. And I'm really pleased to say that, first of all, there is a consensus that we really need to deal with the current crisis, but it's in the Ukraine, but it's also critical that we keep sight of those longer-term net zero goals. And that's, I think, reflected a lot of the conversation today. So I'm really pleased to hear that. The number one ask was that we have really clear regulatory frameworks and policy signals. That's absolutely key to drive more investment into mature technologies, but also the less mature technologies. In terms of the sort of policies that were asked for, permitting came up again, the administrative issues, the licensing delays, lots of frustration about that. We need price signals. Global carbon price came up again and again, carbon border adjustment mechanisms as well. We want support mechanisms for contracts for the future, tax credits, etc. Early stage support for the newer technologies, CCUS, green hydrogen, biomethane. There was also a question not just to focus on the generation side, the demand side, as we heard earlier as well, is absolutely critical. We need policy signals so that consumers also change their demand patterns, that we have energy efficiency, that we move to heat pumps and so on. We need building standards. So that regulatory environment is absolutely critical for companies to shift their behavior, but also for investors to make capital available. There's a huge need, as the roadmap has shown, for opportunities of investing in clean technologies in emerging markets and developing countries. And we had some really great examples from Singapore, Colombia, just to name a few of the sort of policies that are already in place in these areas. Singapore supporting R&D, innovation, more access to green finance. Colombia talked about tax credits linked to investment. So some very good good policies. We also need much more in terms of blended finance mechanisms to really bring that private and public sector money together. And then finally, collaboration was emphasised, the need for much more collaboration between policymakers, companies and investors from an early stage, particularly in developing markets, and that we should have a forum to really have these discussions on a much more regular basis so that we don't lose sight of the net zero transition, the just transition, the energy security that we all know we need. Thank you very much for having me today and for being able to report back on a really fascinating session.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Okay, and now Ben van Beurden, CEO of Shell, I'd like to have you come to the podium. He's going to be reporting on the group that was discussing how to decarbonize the very hard to decarbonize sectors. I know this is actually very near and dear to Secretary Kerry's heart as well, my colleague, because he's part of the First Movers Coalition mover and shaker where DOE participates as well. So glad that you're here and thanks for reporting out.
Thank you very much, Secretary. And indeed, Secretary Kerry was also in our discussion. So the hard-to-abate sectors, what are they? Well, there is heavy industry, of course, so things steel, petrochemicals, cement, etc., but also long-distance transportation, so aviation, shipping, heavy goods transportation on the road. And the first question we had is, why are these sectors actually hard to decarbonize? And are they hard to decarbonize? Was it maybe that we had others that were easier and now these ones were a bit of an afterthought? And we debated that actually quite a bit. And we came to the conclusion that maybe they weren't as hard as a lot of people fear or expect them to be. And then we went through a number of topics, why they could be or couldn't be or shouldn't be hard to decarbonize. Now, the first one, obviously, is technology. It's often being said that these technologies don't exist yet, so therefore it's hard. But actually, if you then listen to many of the participants in the discussion, there are many examples where we actually are making moves. Technologies are much further along than perhaps we collectively fear. Things are happening. Think of green steel, it's happening. Aviation, it's happening. CCS is happening. Hydrogen is happening. All these things are happening. Maybe not enough, but it's not as if the technologies are just only in the lab. They are actually out there. They are being deployed, but not enough. So why are there not enough in terms of deployment then? Now, an element of orchestration came up. We need to be better orchestrated for this, maybe more so than, for instance, with clean electricity, which is a different type of problem to deal with. So maybe we have to have a much more sectorial approach where the different sectors have different ways of getting to zero. But maybe also we have to think about other ways of coordinating. And a very interesting point was being brought up. Can we think more along the lines of ports, where ports typically are clusters where things can happen, but ports also provide interconnectivity, typically to other ports, and therefore ports have network effects that can actually provide for more easily orchestration as well. They are very good ways of thinking about the problem. Now, of course, you can imagine a lot of the discussion went on typical energy vectors. So hydrogen is typically a vector that is key for these hard-to-abate sectors. Sustainable aviation fuels, as you can imagine, or anyway, low-carbon fuels in general. And we had quite a bit of discussion how we can bring that about. I'll come back to that in a moment. But of course, we have to bear in mind that many of these vectors also, in the end, have power behind them. So even though we talk about green steel and green hydrogen and everything else, it is actually green power that we are talking about if you peel the onion back farther enough. And therefore, the challenges that we're going to see in the power system are going to be even bigger than the challenges that we are seeing at the moment. But we thought that the hardest part of the hard-to-abate sectors is actually how to provide incentives to do it. Because, of course, we can say, bring on a carbon price and it will all happen. But we also know from many of these sectors, carbon pricing doesn't work. Or carbon pricing should be too high in order for it to have an effect. Or it is simply not the most effective way of incentivizing. It is more a penalizing system for some of these sectors. So we need to have other ways of doing it. Now, we see happening already a certain degree of voluntary adoption. People who want to have green steel in their cars because it's just good for the image of the brand of that particular car. or sustainable aviation fuels in companies like Amazon, who know that, for customer images, they need to actually do this. But in the end, we also find that mandates are going to be necessary, and standards. So mandates in order to bring an obligation to adopt a certain amount of green or clean or blue or whatever else product, but then standards to define what actually is green, or what actually is blue, or what is low carbon. All of that is also very much needed. Now, these things can only be implemented by governments. We all realize that. Also governments, by the way, in our team realize that. But I also very much realize that they're going to be driven by industry. So this is a natural way for government and industry coming together, industry suggesting ideas, governments critiquing and implementing the ideas. But it's also going to be for governments to support infrastructure build-out, because a hydrogen economy cannot just come about by building lots of electrolyzers. We need infrastructure as well. But also we need to have faster permitting for all these new technologies, and we need to have stability of all of this, because the biggest challenge that we found also in the discussion is that policies are not always stable, they tend to change, and for as long as that happens, companies tend to hang back. And just see what happens next. Just as an example, for my company, we're about to sanction a project for green hydrogen in the Netherlands that may be $1 billion plus, with 0 customers for it. So we want to have some form of clarity about what's going to happen with the policy framework in the Netherlands, as you can imagine. Now, I come back to the point of orchestration, my last point, Secretary, which is the orchestration point. We need a whole lot more coordination, orchestration than we need in many of the other sectors of the economy and the energy transition. That is, first of all, because the intricacy within sectors is much higher. I think by now everybody understands how you make clean electricity, but how you make clean industrial products is quite often much more intricate. We need to deal with global competition, because many of these heavy-duty industries are global industries, and the moment you try it out successfully in one geography, another geography may very effectively undercut it by global competition. So there needs to be international coordination on this matter to deal with the carbon leakage issues, etc. And therefore we think it is only natural that an agency like the IEA has a key role to play under the leadership of Fatih Birol, who of course is a heavyweight in all of this, who understands the intricacies of all of this as well, and who is a natural convener for some of the challenges that I just laid out. And I hope that sort of summarizes our discussion reasonably well. Thank you.
Very great. Thank you so much. I would imagine that on the standards piece, that it's important to have cross-jurisdictional alignment on those standards too, so that you're not having to jump between places, which is another reason why multinational entities are in a good place potentially to be able to help to get alignment on those. Yep. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And now our critical minerals rapporteur, Kristen Bruch, who's the chief executive officer of Siemens Energy. We started to talk about this, you and I did, as we were sitting there, but maybe you can share with the group what the critical mineral clog essentially means for industries like businesses like yours, and how can government, again, work in a positive way with industry to really break through those supply chain jams.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. I also have the pleasure to condense a long, very dense discussion in 2 minutes now. And I think there were 2 statements up front, which I would just like to highlight. First of all, we all agree there's an unprecedented requirement for materials seeing the energy transition. And the second point is no country can do it alone. And let me address first the demand side. So what is the demand side, or what was the discussion around it on the materials and minerals? First of all, what is needed is really an end-to-end strategy by country. And it's not a given that it's really clear in the midterm what is actually needed country by country. And this strategy obviously needs to reveal a risk profile which is lower than our risk profile today in some energy dependencies. Which means also that we need to coordinate the supply chain internationally so that we avoid not everybody does the same at the same time. Because at the end, we need to understand on how we also connect countries in the need. We had one discussion also around that sometimes it's not just minerals, sometimes it can be the scarcity of human resources actually when we get into implementing. One key element on the demand side will be also sharing more information, making it transparent, what it's needed, and at the end also really understand better who's doing what. Let me come to the supply side of the structure, which was an interesting discussion. And this is really about, on the one side, getting the production or the mining, and on the other side, the processing in line. Once again, from the point, not everybody does everything at the same time. So how do we build a mining industry with an ESG perspective? And obviously, there was a lot of points around biofuel for the transport, recycling waste, also creating the transparency on how the extracting industry works from an ESG perspective to, at the end, make this industry attractive for investment. And I think this is one of the core elements which we need to reflect. The industry is today very often not in the normal Western countries because we don't want to have it, because we actually see it as very critical. It's not a sexy investment ESG-wise, and it's something which we need to think about on how to steer money into this segment and also get public acceptance for mining industry in the respective countries. One element which was brought up, and it's in particular obviously from a governmental side a piece, is how do we create tax incentives on the upstream side? I think we talk about very much about the downstream side, about the needs, but we probably need to think about how do we create tax incentives and how do we build global market champions in this industry who can really compete? Maybe as a conclusion, I think what is also the role of the IEA, there was a fierce agreement in the discussion around a strong cross-nation collaboration. And this will only work with bodies like the IEA, like in sessions with here. There are other bodies in this involved as well. But this coordination element is critical, and I think this ESG criteria for the mining industry will be a precondition, actually, to devote money to that. And the transparency piece will come on top of that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We often talk about this issue about how do we responsibly extract in the United States, because we have sort of been hands-off about allowing us to source critical minerals in particular from outside of the U.S. and this whole full value chain. I'm sure other countries are thinking about this. It really, so much of it revolves around the best practices related to sustainable extraction and sustainable mining. So super important, and I think that's also when the more sustainable it is and the more people see it as an indispensable part of the clean energy economy, the more you're able to attract workers in those areas, which I know are a part of the supply chain that is a real challenge as well. So we have been really blessed to have incredible co-chairs as part of this effort. Minister Taylor from Australia, who I think because it's 3 o'clock in the morning, he has outsourced his responsibilities here to Ambassador Pearson, who is Australia's ambassador to the OECD. So glad that you're here to be able to comment on what you've heard today. Minister Jorgensen is also unable to join us today, so we're going to have reactions from Minister van der Straten. Thank you so much for your co-chairing as well, and the excellent session that you were responsible for earlier today. So maybe I can start with you, if you don't mind, for you to give some reflections on what you heard today and what your takeaways are.
My most important takeaway is that we can do this. That we can do this, we can do this. And we had, in this afternoon, we had difficult discussions about critical minerals, for example. It's a difficult subject. And we have our hard-to-abate sectors, also a difficult discussion. The sector was mentioned as an orphan sector that we often do not discuss a lot. But what I take with me is that We can do this, and that's the most important thing. We can do this together. But I would like to use my time to make another point. We are now a lot thinking about next winter and upcoming winter and maybe the third winter after this winter. And that's important because our citizens are suffering, our industries, our companies are suffering, and we have to do something about the high energy bills, and we have to ensure security of supply in the short term. But we cannot waste the moment. And we need to take and we need to decide also now on the short term on those measures that have an impact on the long term, and that is renewable energy, accelerating the energy transition and energy efficiency. If we stay stuck in our fossil fuel thinking, then we are not going to make it, and then we cannot do it. But if we are able to do it, and I'm a firm believer that we can do, and that's what I've heard from all of you today, then we have to make this switch in our thinking and give more room to the debate how we are going to make work this acceleration on renewable energy and on energy efficiency. And that's the most important thing. We have to fix things. We have to fix our security of supply for next winter, but we have to be architects also. And that's on renewable energy. And so that we will be working on tomorrow in our official meeting of the governing board. And maybe let me thank you also for your great leadership today and also tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you for keeping our eye on the prize, which of course is a sustainable planet, our shared home. Ambassador Pearson, your reflections from today.
Yes, I mean, I think the really seminal moment today was the presentation by the Deputy Minister from Ukraine, because what he did was that he underlined the role that energy plays in geopolitics and that geopolitics plays in energy. I mean, this has been, I think, something that people have grown a little complacent about in recent years, in recent maybe decades. I remember about a year ago, I was working for the Australian Prime Minister. He came back from his Christmas leave and ordered everyone to read Dan Jurgen's The New Map. And I think we all had, we all thought, oh, maybe that is just one step too far. That there may be authoritarian states out there, and they may behave badly, but they wouldn't behave as badly as they have. And so it's exposed the vulnerability of our supply chains in a way that I don't think we expected. And so we have to bear that in mind going forward. And I think it underlines the fact that we had underestimated the importance of energy security. Now, I'm probably going to differ in some of my remarks with my Belgian counterpart, but I had a look the other day at the role that fossil fuels play still in our economies. The OECD average in 2010 was 82.9. That's as a share of primary energy. The OECD average in 2020 was 77.9. So we've made progress, but we've got a lot more to do. But it also underlines the fact that if there's going to be an energy security part of this story, we're going to have to decarbonise fossil fuels, because they are, whether we like it or not, they're going to be very, very important to the energy security story for a long time to come. And I think no person has made this point more regularly and more strongly than Fatih Birol. And so that underlines the importance, and that goes to all of the incentives, all of the policy levers that we've been talking about today must also be part of that fossil fuel story. And I'm not saying that because Australia is a fossil fuel player. I'm saying it because the numbers are hard to ignore. And finally, 2 points. One is the point about, I think there is a technological optimism in this sector that hasn't been around for some time. You know, I think someone wrote a book, Tyler Cohen wrote a book, I think in 2011 and 2012, and about how technology hadn't quite come along in the last couple of decades. It hadn't delivered big shifts like technology delivered in the period from the 1880s to 1940. And I remember a particular quote about that was, I think Peter Thiel, who's a tech pioneer, said, we thought in the 50s, 60s, 70s and the 80s that the tech boom would give us flying cars, and instead it gave us Twitter. But I do think, but now he's saying, and others are saying, that we've come past that, and now we are on the brink of a new era in technological optimism, whether it's in medicines, whether it's in energy, whether it's in other parts of the technology story. So I did detect that in our session on the hard to abate sectors. Finally, on that last session we had, there was sort of one thing missing when we talked about the international collaboration on how to fix those hard to abate sectors. And we talked a lot about steel, we talked a lot about aluminium, we talked a lot about cement. China accounts for nearly 60% of steel. State-owned enterprises in China account for 60% of that. China accounts for nearly 60% of aluminium, and China accounts for more than 40%, I can't remember the number, maybe 45% of global cement. So that underlines not just the international collaboration between us, but it underlines the importance of international collaboration with China. And I know that again is one of the strengths of the IEA, because they, even though it's not a member, I think the lines of communication between the IEA and China are very good. I'll stop there.
Thank you for those thoughtful insights, and I'm going to let Fatih Birol have the last word. I do, though, to your first point about energy security and national security, I do think that up to this, in large measure, we have allowed the private sector to determine how far and fast we go, because does this pencil out? Is it profitable? But I'll just say, I'll speak for me. I won't speak for my whole country, but I will say that with the situation in Ukraine, what Fatih has been saying about security, and combined with the actual existential threat to nations about not having this independence, really turns up the volume and hopefully turns up the action. I hope we're not back here next year having these same, or 2 years from now, I guess your 50th anniversary of IEA, coming back having these same conversations, this next period of time. This is why we call this a year of implementation. We cannot just be having these again because of the national security implications of what is happening before our eyes. So I pray that we can use this terrible circumstance as a way to accelerate. And with that, Fatih, last word to you.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. For a second, I was very happy because I thought you were telling me your 50th anniversary. I thought I was 50 years old, so I felt very good. But for IES, to make it clear, next in 2 years is IES 50th anniversary, not mine. So now, a couple of things. First of all, I completely agree with Ambassador Pearson that the fossil fuels are stubborn. It is difficult to change, but this doesn't mean that it is impossible. Now, this brings me to my point. Madam Secretary, I believe we are experiencing the first global energy crisis. We hit an oil crisis 73, 74, another oil crisis 79, 80, and now we are having oil and natural gas crisis and maybe others joining that. Now, why I'm saying this, what I feel today, because when we look at the 73, 74, 79, 80, they led to economic hardship, inflation went up. We will see the same thing, and we are seeing the same thing today. Inflation is surging, economic growth is slowing down. But what we have also seen in the 70s, those shocks, not only the inflation and the economic slowdown, but also response to that crisis. Global energy efficiency never increased as much as it increased as a result of that response. If you look at the car efficiency, fuel efficiency, as you say in the United States, or car efficiency here, the biggest improvement, how many liters of gasoline or diesel you use for 100 kilometers, a big improvement there. Many new technologies came. So my bet is, thinking of this, listening these reactions from the governments, from the industry, investors, this response to this global energy crisis will be acceleration of clean energy transitions. I believe this because I see it is coming. It will be efficiency, it will be renewables, it will be hydrogen, it will be electric cars. It is going to accelerate the clean energy transition, and the main driver may not be only the climate change, but main driver may well be the energy security. So energy security will not be a break, but an accelerator to clean energy transitions as a response to what we are experiencing now. And this will be the world's response to Russia, in addition to giving a response to Russia, bringing their revenues down. So this is what I felt today in today's discussion, Madam Secretary.
Great. Well, thank you so much to all of you, to all of you, to all of you for participating today. I think this is an adjournment of this 2022 IEA Ministerial. Thank you.
Yeah, but they know, I'm just